Sorry, thank
Oh,
you.
no worries, you're fine. Okay, so these are kind of the large buckets of ways that we track birds in particular. And this isn't every single way, but these are the main buckets. So we have band recovery. So bird banding, you've probably heard about this. It's the oldest way that we have tracked birds for a very, very long time. And what happens is you purchase bands from the bird banding lab, which is run by the U.S. Geological Survey. It's the one place where you can order federal bird bands from, and they come in varying sizes. You capture the bird and put this bird band on their leg that has a unique code on it. So if the bird is ever found dead, or if it's recaptured in a mist net during, a research study or a mist netting bird banding station, you can look up that code in this federal database and see where that bird was originally tagged. So you get point A and point B if the bird is ever recovered. Radio telemetry is how MODIS works. So this is a different form of tracking where you put a tag of some size, shape that's allowable according to federal regulations on a bird. And then it emits a signal that you pick up with an antenna or a receiver on the landscape, and you follow the bird around and get information about its movements. There's other things called geolocators, which are really interesting, but they're a different type of tag. So you can see it on the back, but that's a bobolink down in the bottom middle. They breed in northern Missouri. They're a grassland bird. And you can see that little tag on its back. What geolocators do is they measure, these are incredibly crazy tags. They have a tiny sensor on it that records light and dark time that allows it to estimate the latitude and longitude of where that bird is during set times. It'll turn on, and then during the day, record those light levels. It logs that information on the tag. But the thing about geolocators is you have to recapture the bird the following year to scan the data off the tag. You have to cut the tag off the bird, take it, and you have to scan it to get the information. But it logs all that information on that tiny, tiny tag. And that's what's really neat about MODIS and these new technologies is all this technology, as we know, IT or cell phones, all this computer technology is developing and changing so quickly and getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So we're able to put them on our smallest birds to track their migrations. There's other things like stable isotopes, which is a little bit older, but you collect a feather, you look at the hydrogen levels where the bird grew that feather, and there's a hydrogen map of the world, and you can kind of very roughly assess where that bird grew its feathers, right? And different birds molt their feathers at different times of year, so you can figure out where a bird is breeding if you capture it elsewhere in a part of that full annual cycle. So then there's satellite telemetry, which really is only capable right now. There's only technology on larger birds, like you see on the red-tailed hawk there. It has a solar panel you can see on it, so it recharges itself with the sun. This is great for a raptor that soars around and gets a lot of sun like that, rather than a bird that spends its time under the shade of a canopy like a forest bird. And so there's lots of different technologies, is the point of this slide. Lots of different ways you can track birds. There are federal regulations that say how much weight you can put on a bird, which makes sense, right? We don't want to negatively impair that bird or cause or increase the chances of mortality, right? So there's a 3% threshold where no auxiliary marker or this tag that you're putting on a bird can exceed 3% of that bird's body weight. So when we're talking about some of our smallest passer and songbirds that are 9-10 grams, that's very, very lightweight. You need a very lightweight tag. You have to be very cognizant of that because we don't want to negatively impact the life of a bird or potentially increase mortality for that bird, especially when we're trying to learn about its full annual cycle. So again, it's a balance between the weight of the transmitter, because the heavier the tag, the bigger the battery, right? And the more power it has. But these new tags have these solar panels. And so it's all just this balance of what we want. Do we want a longer living tag? Or do we want, it's all just based on what your research question is, which is what it always comes back to. So greater white-fronted geese, I just want to talk about Mitch Wiegman, who was a professor here at Mizzou. He's since gone on to another position, but he tracked greater white-fronted geese very long distance. And of course, greater white-fronted geese are huge. So they're able to carry a transmitter that not only got a GPS signal every 30 minutes, but it had an accelerometer on the tag that you see there that measured different algorithms of the bird's body movements to know whether it was feeding or sleeping or flying. So not only did it get locations every 30 minutes for this bird, it got behavior of what the bird was doing, what activity it was doing based on algorithms of the movement of the tag on the animal. So these tags can be very sophisticated. Here's just a few pictures I want to show you of different types of tracking on birds. These are mostly Missouri Department of Conservation pictures. You saw the Missouri Department of Conservation triangle on the first slide. And really that's because I've done most of this MODIS work supported by the Conservation Department. They really went out on a limb to trust me to do this MODIS work. And so I always want to acknowledge them and their trust in that because it's really been amazing. So these are MDC photos of a turkey project that's going on in North Missouri. You can see that they're putting those large tags on a turkey, which these tags last 2 or 3 years. So they're less sophisticated, right? They don't have a solar panel on them. They emit a signal very frequently, but they don't need really sophisticated tags because these are probably a lot cheaper than the really sophisticated tags. So it's really just, again, a balance. It's always a balance of what's your research question. And they also put hundreds of these tags out on the landscape. So they need a lot more tags that are maybe less sophisticated because you can put more out on the landscape. You can see them processing the turkey there on the left with a sock over its head. That just helps it stay calm. I don't know if we can turn off some of the lights. That may help seeing some of the images, but it's not necessary if we can't easily. These are greater prairie chickens, and they were reintroduced to the state 10 plus years ago, probably more than that at this point. COVID has messed up my estimations of years. I don't know about you, but you can see this neck collar tag on the prairie chicken on the left. And here we see Len Gilmore with his Yagi antenna in his hand. What's happening is that tag's emitting a signal on a set frequency that he's plugged into this receiver in this little bag. And it's hooked up to that antenna. So if he points it in a direction and it's set to the frequency of this individual tag, he'll hear a beep, right? If the bird is alive and the tag is still alive on the landscape. If he points it this way away from the bird, it won't be as loud or he won't hear it at all. But if he points it this way, he knows the bird is that way because he hears a beep. And as he gets closer, he can hear the beep getting louder and louder. So you can track a bird, get a really pretty solid location on where that bird is, and you don't have to necessarily see it with your eyes. And then you put that into your map and you build these maps of these movements of birds. Again, this is the tag that we saw on the other screen. And then this is just kind of a fun story. One of my colleagues in grad school, a fellow grad student, Allison Cox, she studied the movement of fledgling, who knows what bird this is? What kind? Yeah, red-bellied woodpecker. But she looked at the post-fledgling dispersal of red-bellied woodpeckers. What that means is how long it takes young woodpeckers that just fledge the nest to develop a territory of their own away from their parents' natal territory, right? And so how do you do that? How do you do that before the birds fledge, right? Because you want those movements after they leave the nest cavity. So what she did is she would find red-bellied woodpecker adults, you can see on the right, she would find their nests. She would monitor them. She would figure out, based on the knowledge of how long it takes the red-bellied woodpecker to fledge a nest, that about a week before the bird would fledge, she would take a huge ladder out to the woods to this nest tree, to this snag. But because you can't lean a ladder up against, or you shouldn't lean a ladder against a dead tree, she would suspend the ladder from 4 ropes in the middle of the forest to living trees right next to the snag. She would climb up to the snag, take a huge, what's it called, Matt? What's that bit you put on a drill that just takes out a circle? A hole saw. A hole saw? Okay. Well, she would use a hole saw and she would cut a hole right underneath the nest cavity entrance because their cavities go down quite a bit. You can't fit your hand in it. She'd cut out a big hole, take the babies out, put them in a little sack, lower them down to people on the ground. They put out a big tarp so that predators couldn't smell the babies on the forest floor, by handling them. So they put it out on the tarp. She'd attach these transmitter tags on their backs, which this was 10 plus years ago. So these tags would be way smaller these days. Okay. So she'd put the tags on, she'd put them back up the ladder to the person, put them in the nest cavity, they glue the hole back on, and then they'd wait a week for the birds to fledge. And so instantly when the birds fledged, she would be able to get movements on how far they were moving, how long they were outside the nest before they come back at night, come back to the parents. And then every day they would scope a little bit farther, and then she would know how long it took these birds to leave their parents' territories, and nobody had really known that before. So it's really niche stuff, but it's really interesting because all of these tracking movements just kind of build on this larger story of us learning more and more about the natural history of these different types of birds. But now these nano tags, which are getting smaller and smaller, are now you're able to put them on large insects like this dragonfly on the right and this monarch on the left, because they are so lightweight. They're like 0.2 grams or 0.02 grams. They're very, very lightweight. We put 0.2 gram transmitters on warblers, but 0.02 grams. They don't last that long. They last a few weeks, but you can get movements on some of these large insects where before this technology, none of this would have really been possible. So again, radio telemetry is what we're talking about today with MODIS. So how that works is you put a tag on a bird. As I said before, it emits a signal on a set frequency, and then you have something, usually an antenna, right, to receive that signal and hear it and then learn about where the bird is going. There's a wide range of capabilities, again, as we talked about, based on battery size, on the size of the bird, of course, federal regulations, you can't put more than 3% of the bird's body weight, right? So how that signal is detected can kind of vary, and no marker and attachment can exceed that 3%. So due to all of these advances in technology, these light tags, longer living batteries, you know, every time you get a new cell phone, the battery lasts a lot longer. This technology is just changing literally every day. And these are becoming more affordable. So these tiny tags are becoming much more affordable to researchers to purchase more and do these larger experiments to answer research questions. So our main big theme today is talking about the MODIS wildlife tracking system. So I'll explain what that is. So the MODIS works off of these small nano tags, these radio transmitters that are, yes, I said it wrong, 0.2 to 2.6 grams, very lightweight, and they emit a pulse every 5 to 30 seconds in a unique pattern on one frequency. And they work off of an array of kind of semi-permanent sensors or receivers that we place on the landscape out there. And if a migratory bird wearing one of these MODIS tags flies within range of any of these MODIS receivers, that signal is detected and stored there on the computer on a unit. So you never have to recapture the bird like geolocators. You capture the bird, put the tag on, let it go, and then you just hope against hope that this bird flies within range of a MODIS station. And so what does that mean? We need a lot of MODIS stations out on the landscape. So the revolutionary thing about MODIS is that all of these tags are detected on the exact same frequency. So before, if I were doing tagging work on, say, those red-bellied woodpeckers, I would order tags on this set range of frequencies. And I would make sure the people doing field work around me weren't using those same frequencies because we hear each other's beeps on the tags, right? You had to be cognizant of that. So I would gather my data on that frequency. I would publish and become rich and famous. Matt, who's doing a different bird tracking, there he is. Hi, Matt. Matt, who's doing another bird tracking project, has his tags on a different set of frequencies, but we're separate, right? We don't want things heard on the same frequency. Well, the thing with MODIS is it all works on the same frequency. So anyone who places a MODIS receiver or MODIS station anywhere in the world, it'll detect these MODIS tags when you're out on the landscape. So I'll show you a few ways to visualize that or illustrate that. So there's over 1,400 receivers in the whole world that are MODIS receivers that all work together on that same frequency. So here's my hideous representation of a bird with a tag on with no feet. I don't know why it doesn't have any feet. Is this Swainson's thrush? I don't know. I grabbed it off the internet in like 2018. I gave this presentation to like 15 different groups that year, trying to drum up support and funding to place MODIS stations because we didn't have any in Missouri. And I don't know why I've never fixed it, but now it's just kind of funny that it's a footless Swainson's thrush that we have. The tag is not that big. That is not to scale. So here's our bird. Here's our MODIS station. It doesn't always have to be a tower. You can place antennas at the top of a building, just as long as they have a clear line of sight. You can place them anywhere high up. But that has a range of about 15 kilometers, about 10 miles in each direction of each antenna. If you have a clear line of sight, like perfect conditions, it's about 10 miles. So here's our bird flying along, fly. Oh my gosh, you guys, it was detected within range of the MODIS station. And so that detection goes to our desktop computer down there. It goes to the MODIS website. Okay, so that's how kind of it works. Here's a large scale of our hideous representation of our Swainson's thrush with a tag on. Say I tag this bird in New York and it leaves on fall migration. Well, it's going down south and it passes within range of 3 of those MODIS stations. Okay, and that detection is picked up and it's logged and it's put on the MODIS website. So now I know the pathway in general, again, it's general, but the pathway that bird took to migrate. And all of this feeds into this, like I said, larger story of where all these birds are going, the different migratory routes they're taking, and things like that. So I took these screenshots a few weeks ago, and every time I give a MODIS presentation, it's outdated because these things change every single day. But in general, there's about 1,400 MODIS receiver stations. 34 countries have MODIS receiver stations. There have been 314 species tagged. There's 37,000 individuals that have ever gotten MODIS tags before out there with different projects. 593 projects to date, 1,700 MODIS partners. So it's this massive collaborative effort where I don't have to place the tracking receivers along my bird's entire migratory route. Someone down in Colombia or Costa Rica or Texas or any state in the bird's migratory pathway can place one of these stations, and my tag that I deploy on my birds will be detected on any of them. So that's what's revolutionary about it, is before we were doing this work just kind of separately, but now it's this collaborative system. So it's working for birds. People have put them on bats. They put them on large insects. It works off of those nano tags and these automated tower detections. And again, it's using the same frequency so we can all work together and be kumbaya together in one group. Also, all data is open source, open access in the spirit of collaboration. So I don't have all of the nitty gritty tag data. I can't go in and like steal someone's research and publish it or anything. But you go on the MODIS website, you can click any of these sensor stations, click on that station and see how many species have been detected on it, of which species, where it was originally tagged and things like that, and see its migratory track and all the stations it's been detected on. So this is the MODIS map on the website. All the yellow dots, which are very small on this map and annoying and hard to see, are active MODIS stations. So I clicked on the one, it's one in southern Missouri that's called Hunter, and you can see my name up there. So all the Missouri stations that are managed by the Missouri Department of Conservation and now us, Fish and Wildlife Service, are run under the same project. So if you click on this is anybody. This isn't just me logged into the MODIS website. Anybody can see this stuff. You click on any of these stations and you click that. And then on tags detected, which is the fourth one down, I know you can't read it very well, it says 12. And you can look at those detections at a table or on a timeline. So if I click table, I can see all the different species that have been detected on that one station in southern Missouri, which is kind of interesting because you can see black terns, common nighthawks, Swainson's thrushes, Sora, little rails that use wetland and marshy habitat, Swainson's thrushes. All those birds are moving through Missouri using us. They don't breed here. Some do, but most of those don't even breed here. They're just moving up north during migration past us, right? And all of that is very important because before we didn't have any MODIS stations in the middle of the flyway that all of these millions of birds are flying through. So as I said, they don't have to be towers. You can place antennas on anything. You can put them on old fire towers. You can see a lot of remote ones here, like the top left one, that's in Canada up in the Boreal, because there's a lot of remote areas up there. So you need solar panels. You don't have a plug-in, right, to give power. Really for the station, you need power. And it's really nice if you have internet. But if you don't, which a lot of these places don't, it either stores those detections there on the unit and you have to go visit it to download it, or there are these new stations that work on the cell network. So if you pay a small data transfer fee to set up one of these MODIS stations and there's a bird detected on it, it's using the cell network to just transmit that detection to the website. It's just amazing what this technology has done. This is what all of ours in Missouri look like. They're on MDC, Missouri Department of Conservation communications towers. So MDC and the Highway Patrol have this network of communications towers across the state for radio communications for their law enforcement and for their staff. And so when I figured that out, and I was at the conservation department, and MODIS was only like 10 or 15% of my job, so I couldn't go out door to door and find people who would let me put MODIS stations on their property. I don't think people would want me to do that in Missouri anyway. Hey, can we put a government tower on your property and listen for birds? I don't know how many people would believe me, but this is what our MODIS stations look like. You can see the antennas about midway up. I can't point very well, but you can see them up there. This is the one in Columbia. This is at Waters Moss Memorial area in the middle of Columbia. And so that's what most of them look like. They're on, but they don't need to be big towers like this. You saw that they can be those tiny pop-up masts just as long as they can see over tree line. Okay, so how does this contribute to conservation? This is all well and good, Sarah, but who cares? Like, who cares where our birds go and why and how long it takes them to get there? Well, all of it contributes to conservation. So as I said at the very beginning, we can learn a lot about migration timing. We can piece together by lots of different MODIS projects on a lot of different species, how long it's taking these birds to get from point A to point B. Because before tracking, we really didn't know that. And the technology really has just blown up in the last 5-6 years for species this small, for our songbirds, for our passerines, that before couldn't have held a tag, right? It can tell us about stopover sites, where these birds are stopping along their migratory routes that are important spots that they need preserved as they move down, because they stop and fatten up. They're just gorging on migration. They're gorging right before they leave on these big flights across the whole Gulf of Mexico. And so identifying those key areas where these birds are using right before these big flights to make it possible for them to survive and come up to breed again are very important. Identifying where these birds are going on the wintering grounds is also very important. It can help us to target habitat conservation work with international partners. So the Missouri Department of Conservation is part of a program called Southern Wings, which is a really neat program through the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. It's a group that advocates for state fish and game agencies in DC. And they coordinate a project where they provide like a vetted menu of projects on the wintering grounds in Mexico, Central America, and South America that state agencies can give some money to help do habitat conservation work on the wintering grounds and on stopover sites. So it's really important that we not completely shift our efforts, right, to help this full annual cycle conservation, but it's very important. I would argue that it's just as important as maintaining healthy and sustainable breeding grounds. Is, you know, they're only spending 3 to 4 months of the year here, right? We're just borrowing these birds from the tropics, really, because we have all this abundance, this seasonal abundance that they use to their advantage to nest, and then they head right back down to the tropics. So I'm going to kind of scoot through some of these animations. These are from the folks at Modus, and these are tracks of Swainson's thrushes tagged in the same location. And you can see you can see the different speeds. You can see the date up at the top. This is from 2017. This is in September in fall migration. They were all tagged in the same place, and you can see that they're moving at different speeds, but they're all generally taking the same route through this forested corridor. So that tells us a lot too, is that we really have to protect that area, right? This is in Ontario, where they have a ton of Modus stations, so it really lets you look at this local tracking. But it tells us the general direction, timing these birds are moving, and that we need to preserve that chunk because all these birds are moving through that corridor. And that can be very important for conservation planning. These are some other animations of this large-scale project that was run by Selva down in Colombia, which is a good partner of ours. And they tagged Swainson's thrushes in the orange and gray-cheeked thrushes on the right. And so the gray-cheeked thrushes on the right, I'll really just talk about them. They were tagged in the Santa Marta Mountains, which this isn't where these Swainson's thrushes overwinter. They overwinter farther south, but they come up and, like I talked about, use this as a stopover site because it's in this really rich tropical forest in the Santa Marta Mountains that has a ton of fruits that thrushes eat. Thrushes like robins, bluebirds, all these thrush species eat insects, but also fruit. So they sit there for up to 2 weeks, they found, and gorge on all of these fruits and fatten up and gain a ton of weight before they make these massive flights across these large waterways across the whole Caribbean and the Gulf. And some of these flights are amazing. One of these birds, I think, flew, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but over 1,000 kilometers in like 3 or 4 days. And then they made another 2,000 kilometer trek way up farther into Canada. It's just amazing what these relatively tiny birds, the distances that they move. This is an infographic from those data that just every time we band a bird or handle it, in general, we take body measurements. So we look at you could blow the feathers away while the bird is in your hand on their breast feathers. This is called the furcula right here, kind of where their clavicles come together at the keel. And they deposit fat right there and also in their pelvic region. So you can blow the feathers away with the bird in your hand and take a fat score because you can see the fat through their skin. It's amazing. And so you can assess how fat birds are, how big their pec muscles are. You blow feathers away on the keel. And if their pec muscles are up over the keel like this, that's a certain measurement. If they're a little flatter, that's another measurement. If they're flat and if they're like indented at the keel, that means they're very underweight and very hungry, right? And not doing too well. So you take those body measurements and look at things like this that show that the fatter birds, the heavier birds went farther faster, which makes sense, right? Because they're able to use those fat stores and go a long, long way in one big flight or a few large flights. So yeah, these are just the numbers that I said before. I won't go over this because I think I'm going to start going over time, but this is just a cool picture of the Santa Marta Mountains in Colombia. Just a beautiful, beautiful country. Guess how many species? Well, I don't know if you have much context, but there's about 335 species that occur in Missouri, give or take like 20 or, for weirdo blown off course birds every year. So we have about 330. Columbia houses 1,900 bird species. It's hard to imagine that kind of bird diversity, but they have such diverse ecosystems in Columbia. It's amazing, like 5 different ecoregions. So these are just some more visualizations of swings and stretches on the left during fall migration in September from 6 different sites. You can see the general migratory pathways they take. Each of these lines is an individual bird that was detected on a MODIS station on their journey south. And then alternately, this is spring migration from Columbia and those Santa Marta Mountains. And you can see each individual going all over the place in all of their different migratory pathways. And while MODIS doesn't give us exact location, it is really interesting and it's a place to start. But if they fly past these stations, we can get a general idea of their migratory routes. I'm going to scooch past this a little bit. So this was from years ago, so it needs to be updated. You can see there's only like 5 stations in Missouri, so that was a while back. But this is the cumulative tracks of all MODIS tagged birds. On the left, all shorebirds, and then on the right, all land birds. But this map would probably look very different today, but it's kind of neat to see all the tracks of all MODIS tagged birds on one map like that to give us a general idea. You can see a lot of concentration in the Northeast, and that's because MODIS originated in Ontario. And so that's where most of the MODIS stations are. Then it spread out to the Northeast, kind of along the East Coast. And then now you'll see it here in a moment, it's really spreading west as well. So I'm the Telemetry Initiative Chair for the Midwest Migration Network, which is kind of a joint venture. It's a group of groups, agencies, NGOs, and we all care about learning more about generally bird migration, but we also talk about bat migration as well. And so our telemetry initiative of this Midwest Migration Network focuses on MODIS, expanding the MODIS network of stations, but also MODIS tagging as well. And I always try and emphasize that we're not just trying to increase MODIS across our Midwest region, but also in the neotropics, again, because it's so important to get more stations down in Central America and the neotropics, because that's where we want to learn where the birds are going, right? So it's just as important to not just put stations up here where they're breeding. So this is kind of our pie in the sky map of where we want stations to go in these latitudinal arrays, east-west, because birds are migrating north-south through those. These aren't set in stone. The orange ones are just the hopeful, wishing ones. The yellow ones are active, but this is, again, every time I give a MODIS talk, it's an outdated map because all of this is developing so quickly, and there's new MODIS stations going up all the time. But the point here is that we want latitudinal arrays or arrays that are going along our major waterways. You can see all of our Great Lakes and our large rivers. We're trying to put more stations there. So I'm kind of that red star in the middle. I'm kind of the Midwest MODIS contact if people are interested in MODIS and want to put up more stations. But there's folks all over the country who are helping to coordinate and help people put up stations to be part of this collaborative network. So here in Missouri, our idea for putting up stations was to put them in 2 latitudinal arrays. So when I first started scheming about MODIS, I'm like, Pennsylvania has a really cool array where their detection diameters of each station overlap. So you're making like a digital fence, right, of stations across the whole state. I'm like, I want to do that, but I want to do 2 of them because, of course, you have to one up everybody. But there's also an ecological reason for that. The northern half of our state and the western, pretty much mostly northwestern third of the state is grassland, right? It's glaciated plains or tall grass prairie out to the west. And in our Ozarks, there are Ozarks. There's central hardwoods, there are hardwood forest, shortleaf pine forests, so very different ecoregions. So we wanted a line up in the northern part and a line through the Ozarks as well. Because I also wanted to see if birds are migrating north through the state, if we can put enough stations in the south, we may detect birds and then they get pinged again as they're coming out through the state in the northern line as well. So we have 32 active MODIS stations in Missouri. We had 19 last year, and we were just able to put out 13 more in the last few months before migration this spring. 21 of those, well, it's more than that. This is an outdated slide as well, guys. It happens every time. But 32 of them are managed by MDC, and I think we have 34 in the state total. So the Missouri Department of Conservation is managing those, and I'm helping as well. Wow, that's beautiful, isn't it? Okay, so this is just the growth that shows when I got involved in MODIS, and I was at a Partners in Flight meeting. A Partners in Flight is a group of groups, again, with international partners across the Western Hemisphere, and we have meetings every 5 or 6 years, and really we come together, present research, talk about how we can collaborate across the hemisphere for migratory birds for conservation. And that was the first time I ever heard about MODIS, was at this meeting in 2017. You could tell then we got started right the next year trying to put up stations. And actually, Fish and Wildlife Service at the Ecological Services Office in Columbia, when I worked for MDC, they gave money for the very first MODIS station that I put in Jefferson City in 2018. So you can see that I finally talked the Conservation Department into giving me a chunk of budget money to put up more stations in 2020. And then we just kept growing from there. We got a few big federal grants through the Fish and Wildlife Service when I still worked for the state. We applied with like 9 other partners to put up 60 more stations in like 8 Midwestern states and 4 countries in the neotropics. So we tried to get a lot of money and support and new folks on board in the Midwest to put up stations. So this is 2018 when this is after we got that first station up in Missouri. But you could see it was like a black hole. It was a black hole. The Midwest was a black hole. The whole West was a black hole. And it was very daunting, right? You saw all those in the Northeast and you were super jealous. Well, I was. This is 2023. So look at this. Isn't that crazy? There's just so much happening. And out West as well. And that's due to like concerted effort to get funds for coordinators, right? Because MODIS takes time. It takes a lot of logistics and planning and getting people on board and ordering the equipment, making sure it's not broken. There's just a lot of pieces to it. None of us biologists or communication people, right, who know the fittings, piece coax to antenna. So it's all a big learning curve for us as well. But it's very exciting. It's growing very quickly. And so Missouri and partners, which you can't see up there, unfortunately, but really through grants that we got and through MDC and other partners, we're responsible for 15 new MODIS stations that are down in Central America and different parts of the neotropics. So that's growing as well. And we need way more stations down there than we do where we are, in my opinion, but there's always going to be gaps to be filled. And these are all the MODIS stations in Missouri now. Since 2018, we have 317 detections of birds on our MODIS stations, which is a lot. That represents 180 tagged animals. You can see the species on the right. It's small print, so I know you can't read it very well, but lots of different types of birds: nighthawks, whippoorwills, shorebirds, terns, blue jays, swallows, catbird, thrush, sparrows, warblers. So lots of different species that run the gamut. And in 2022 alone, this shows you how rapidly this is growing. In 2022 alone, we got 140 of those 300 detections just in 1 year. And this past spring, 2023, I think we got 60 or 70 detections, and that's a lot for spring. Normally we get more detections in the fall. So they tell some really neat stories on here. So this is the track of one swing-tooth thrush that was detected in Missouri. And when you get detections in Missouri, you can keep clicking to look at this one individual and look at a track and look at a map to see where it was detected before and kind of where it's going. But this is a neat one because it's showing 2 whole years of movements. We got detections in Missouri. You can see those blue dots. This one bird was detected on 3 different stations in Missouri, 1 in the south and then 2 in the north as it was moving up. And these birds go up to breed in British Columbia. And then they're detected as they come back down. They go around the Rockies and down to, and then it was detected in Costa Rica, one of our partner MODIS stations. So it's really cool because it also connects you to the international partners you work with. Because during all spring and fall migration, I'm texting with my nerdy bird conservation partners in Costa Rica and Colombia saying, it's very exciting. This was a whippoorwill that was tagged in Ontario on July 13th of 22. It was detected at 3 different stations in Missouri on the same day, which means this bird was booking it. It was going south. But it was detected on 3 different stations. I think that's so neat. And then it was detected in Veracruz, Mexico, about 14 days later. So we don't know where it was in between those times and where it stopped over. But the more stations we get up, the more we'll be able to learn about where these birds are going. So in Missouri in the Midwest, and you can see the neotropics, can't ever forget the neotropics. We have these reports that we put out that encapsulated the 2018 to 21 detections in Missouri. This is just a high level kind of fun report that talks about Motus and shows the detections. And then we updated it for 2022 because we had so much more data just for 22. We're hoping to do these every single year. They're pretty easy to put together, but it's neat because it shows people what types of birds, how many detections we're getting in the state. This is a really cool graphic from that report. This shows all of the places where birds that were detected in Missouri, where they were originally tagged, where they were first tagged before they were released with the Motus tag on. So there's birds from all over the place, from the whole Western Hemisphere, that are being released with tags on, that are being detected later in Missouri. This is a map of the larger the yellow circle, the more Motus detections have been detected on that station. So a lot in the Ozarks, a lot in North Missouri than I imagined, honestly. But yeah, you can kind of see some hot spots of these birds moving through. And then it just goes through the different species. But again, the research opportunities are only as strong as our Motus network. Will you tell me when I'm like getting close to the end and need to wrap it up?
You're fine.
Okay. Okay, you guys go till 8:30, right?
Yes.
I won't go to 8:30, I promise. Okay, so these are some of these international partners I was talking about. There's Ernesto on the left, Paz in the middle, and Nick, and then myself. You can tell that I worked for MDC when we took these pictures. But all of these efforts, now we're getting to kind of the more fun parts of, all of the nitty gritty and exhaustion of placing stations all over the place. Well, now we can start thinking about, well, okay, what birds are we going to tag? Because in the beginning, when I was first trying to put up all these stations in Missouri, people were like, yeah, but you need to include in your grant proposal, you need to add in like tagging birds because that's more fun. It's like a sexier part of the research. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to put out tags that are most threatened birds when there's no stations for the birds to be detected on. That seems like a waste. So it was kind of, it took some time to talk people into this. It's more boring, but we got to put up stations. We got to put up stations before we put out tags. And 5-6 years later, here we are where we have a bunch of stations in Missouri. And one of the avenues that we've been trying is to tag birds down in the winter on their wintering grounds pre-spring migration, because we have more stations up in the US right now at this point in time. And so tagging birds down there as they move north increases the probability that these birds will be detected on their routes because there's fewer stations down there. Rather than us tagging them here and setting them down, there's more and more stations being put up all the time. So one of the projects from this big grant that I mentioned before was to put tags on 25 golden wing warbler and 25 wood thrush. You can see wood thrush on the top right and golden wing warbler on the bottom right. Just a really beautiful bird. It nests in really scrubby early successional habitat up in Minnesota and Wisconsin. It just migrates through Missouri. But there are species that are up for consideration for potential endangered species listing in a few years. I think that's been pushed to 25 or 26. But any new information we can learn about golden wing warblers is very important. These birds are both declining forest birds. Different life stages of forest for the golden wing and the wood thrush, but both forest dependent birds. Here's a picture of a golden wing warbler. You can see the little Motus tag on its back. And so we deployed 25 tags on wood thrush and 25 tags on golden wings. Here's just some more close-up cool pictures of the birds because they're just absolutely stunning, I think. And then putting all these Motus stations up just results in some really amazing detection. So I wonder if I can get this to go away. If I click on this. Oh well, it doesn't.
Or escape.
I don't know. Well, I think that'll stop the presentation. That's okay. So this is Brad Jacobs. He was my predecessor in the ornithologist role at the Missouri Department of Conservation. He worked at MDC for 30+ years, and he was a really prominent mentor in my life. He passed away in May of 2020, kind of unexpectedly. And so the Columbia Audubon Society donated funds to place a Motus station in Brad's name at Columbia, the Waters Moss Memorial Area's Motus station. And then he put up this plaque that says donated in memory of Brad Jacobs. So he put up that Motus station in the winter. So I was down south doing field work, and I got a text from the president at that time of the Columbia Audubon Society. And he said, hey, Sarah, we got our first detection on our Columbia Motus station. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so exciting. Like on the Brad Jacobs Tower. I'm like, oh, cool. What is it? He says the golden wing warbler. And my heart stopped because I took a picture of this bird and we tagged it in Costa Rica. and it flew through. Because Brad taught me about the value of full annual cycle conservation. He was a huge advocate of full annual cycle conservation. That Southern Wings program I told you about, that was pretty much his idea. And the conservation department helped take it, and AFWA adopted it as an actual program. But he was a huge proponent. There's a picture of him there in the background in Honduras, but he was a huge proponent of needing to care about birds on their full annual cycle. And on the first station donated, like in memory of him, it was a bird that it's that bird. It's that bird. And we banded it in a coffee farm, a shade bird-friendly coffee farm. And you can see the coffee plants in the background. So this is the track of that bird. We tagged it here. And then 2 months later, it was detected not only at the Columbia station, but in the Ozarks a week before. So we were able to show a week-long stopover in our Ozarks, which is really cool, with what we wanted to show with this 2 latitudinal arrays in the state. So that's kind of just a cool story. And then we always have to have slow-mo bird release pictures after we tag birds. So this is actually vanilla being grown up these little bamboo stalks in the middle of the coffee farm. Which is really interesting. We are catching golden wing warblers on this bird-friendly coffee farm. In the middle of vanilla they were growing. Here's a wood thrush of those 25 that we tagged. Gotta love a slow-mo release video. We got more, don't worry. So anyway, these pilot efforts are leading to these larger projects. So we tested out this small sample of 25 birds, right? And we're like, I wonder if this will work. Let's see. And then we got quite a few detections from that small sample of birds. So we're like, maybe we can expand these or tag more, because we want proof of concept to make sure that, it works before we increase the sample and put out more tag birds. And so this golden wing small sample of 25 birds led us to, I got this small grant within the Fish and Wildlife Service to buy 50 tags. So we're like, we'll put out 50 tags on golden wing warblers across a gradient of precipitation in Costa Rica, like at a number of different sites across the country. And so our local partners that you saw in the previous pictures, here's Ernesto and Paz. Well, I also talked my supervisor and my colleague from the Fish and Wildlife Service into going as well. I really had to twist their arm. And then Nick Bailey is from Colombia, the country in Selva, is a partner. This is Adam Smith in the back with the beard and his wife, and they built Motus receivers of the previous height. So we've always been in contact about Motus receivers, and so they were excited to come. Adam is the new U.S. Motus coordinator for the whole country. And then I got Stu McKenzie right here, who runs Motus out of Ontario, out of Birds Canada. So he's like the head of Motus. Got him to come too. And so it was like a huge party where we all went down and tagged birds. And it was just really fun. And all of them knew how to handle and tag birds. So we were able to break up into all these groups and go out in these areas and just try and trap as many birds as we could to put out these 50 tags. So these are some of the areas that we would be hiking around, a lot of reserves and protected areas that Paz and Ernesto went out and scouted before we got down there. So we'd be hiking around, we'd be carrying our net poles with us and our nets. So we'd have everything in hand. We had a recording of golden wing warblers that we play to get them to come to the net. So we'd be walking these trails, we'd hear a golden wing chip or we'd hear a golden wing song and we'd go, oh my gosh, there's one. So we'd verify that it was a golden wing and we'd, okay, put the nets up. So we'd all unpack our stuff and put the nets up. And so this is just us doing that. These are the big poles right here that I'm carrying and taking pictures at the same time. But these folks in Central and South America are so well versed with like machetes, they don't go in the field without machetes. And if they need an extension to a net pole to get the net up higher in the canopy, they just go over and cut down a small tree that'll grow back in a few months, right? They just cut down a small tree like this one, shave off the bark and any limbs, and then they just poke it in the net pole. And there you go. And it's very resourceful. So that's what we're carrying around with these sticks or the net poles that you put at the end, put the net between the two poles. So then, if we were lucky, we'd catch birds, put them in a bird bag while we got all of our supplies ready. And then we take these measurements on the bird. So you can see we look at bolts on the bird's wing to determine age of the bird. You take a measurement of how long the wing is, called wing chord. You take a weight measurement in a film canister. You poke the bird in head first. It's very embarrassing for the bird, maybe. And we put a color band on it so that They can be visually detected through the color band on their leg in addition to the federal silver band. And then this is blowing away the feathers I was talking about. You can see the red of its skin and you can see the fat through the skin to take body condition measurements. These are the tiny harnesses that we put the tags on with. So the tags go on like a backpack. It's called a figure 8 leg loop harness. It goes around their haunches like on their drumsticks, like on a chicken. Goes around on their haunches and they wear the little transmitter on the back right above their tail, like a backpack. And then the antenna hangs down their tail. But we do a number of sizes so that when we capture the bird and take its wing cord, that's a good measurement of how big the bird is. So based on the wing cord and how long the wing is on the measurement we take, we decide what size harness to use on the different birds. We don't want it to be too tight. So this is just a picture. This is Julie from Colombia with Selva, and she's just processing the bird and putting on that tag. It's very tedious work. These are just a few pretty pictures of golden wing warblers because they're amazing. And more slow-mo release videos, of course. We can't not have slow-mo release videos. Sometimes it takes them a minute to realize they're free. But before they even release them, they test that they have good function of their legs and their wings. So like we want to make sure that they're going to be able to fly off. And if they don't, for some reason, we pick them back up and take the harness off. A lot of these birds in these slow-mo videos, they do kind of like a half roll, and then they kind of right themselves and realize that there's something on their back. So another piece of this is putting up these local MODIS stations nearby. And so I don't know if it's because the culture is more trusting in Costa Rica, but in about 3 hours, Ernesto was able to talk to 3 different landowners to place these small MODIS stations on their property for the next 3 or 4 months. He just went up to the person, started explaining it, talked about it looked like a TV antenna, and then we put it up. We all helped to put up this antenna, literally just on a piece of bamboo we found over there, and like shing, shing, shing with this machete. And then we zip tied it to the side of this guy's house, and it has the antenna on top pointed at the hillside over here that we tracked birds on that morning. So it's pretty amazing. These are, and yeah, this is just to say that the relationships you build with these international partners is probably the most valuable thing you're going to do. Because it's just really special relationships. So another thing, from those 25 birds, wood thrush, not the golden wings, the wood thrush that we tagged, we found some really cool tracks. These are tracks of 8 of those 23 birds that shows that they're breeding in the Northeast region, right? I mean, it's pretty clear they're going right there and then they're going back. The green lines show spring migration and the yellow lines show fall migration. So they're quite a bit different, the tracks that they're taking. So we felt that if we could get this clear tracks off of just 8 birds out of 23, what would happen if we put out a lot more tags across more of the breeding grounds and across more of the wintering grounds? Because clearly the birds we tagged in Costa Rica and Nicaragua alone are going to the Northeast. So where are the birds farther west in their breeding range going, right? Are they going farther west in the wintering range? Or where are they going? And all of that will inform how these different states do this full annual cycle conservation and who they partner with, among many other conservation deliverables. So this is blocked, but I'll just tell it to you. But as I said, if these birds are going to the Northeast, what would happen if we deployed so many tags per country across the entire wintering range? Where would those birds be going? And then, but what if we deployed tags across their entire breeding range? This is the breeding range in red, of wood thrush. This is the wintering range in blue. What would happen if we deployed tags also from the breeding range so that we had tagged birds moving back and forth from both sides of the range? That's really something that hasn't been done before at this scale across the species' entire range. So that's what we're initiating. We're initiating a project where I'm trying to talk all of these states across the breeding range into coming up with the funds and the folks to go out next summer and tag 25 wood thrush in their state and deploy those tags before fall migration. So we'll have, I think we have 12 to 14 states signed up so far. So we'll have about 400 tags being deployed in fall migration heading south. And then international partner is going to coordinate the tagging of birds across the entire wintering range because he has those connections down there. So they'll tag birds across the entire wintering range too. The tags that go on wood thrush are large enough, as you saw with the Swainson's thrush data, that the tags last over a year. So we'll get 2 full migration movements on each bird coming from both directions. So we could have up to 600 tags out there from both sides of the breeding and wintering range of birds moving across, trying to get information on really where a lot of these breeding and wintering populations are tied together. So that's exciting stuff that we're working on now. And a lot of MODIS has been crowdsourced. We raised about $50,000 through the Conservation Heritage Foundation. They have a MODIS account. And when I went around and gave all these presentations when MODIS was first getting started, anybody can go on there and just donate some funds to it. Audubon chapters were amazing and stepped up and gave funds to put up a whole station. It was really very exciting. And the same, I think, will happen with this wood thrush project. Audubon chapters, the Missouri Birding Society, have already given chunks of money to help fund some of the tags that are deployed, not just in Missouri, but also on the wintering ground. So it's really exciting. It's a really cool kind of crowdsourced collaborative effort, which is what MODIS was made for. So thanks, guys. I know that was really long, but I appreciate your attention and I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Okay, who has questions? All right, we'll start over here with Christine and I'll come to the back.
Audubon came to mind immediately, and I know that they have bird counts.
Yeah.
And have for decades. And so I'm really curious how you incorporate their information and how that feeds the work that you are doing through MODIS.
Yeah, so those are very, very different forms of monitoring. So as you know, but the tracking kind of gives us more detailed information about where the birds are going and those tracks that they're making. Long-term surveys like the breeding bird survey do almost a completely different thing. So there's the breeding bird survey and the Christmas bird count, which is held in the winter. And then the breeding bird survey, of course, is happening right now. It's from May 26th to July 7th. So it's only during that breeding season. So folks go out and they drive a 24.5-mile route, a predetermined route. You stop every half mile and you count all the birds seen and heard in 3 minutes. You get back in your car, drive a half mile, get out, count for 3 minutes, get out. Do that for 50 stops. So it takes all morning. But that has occurred since 1970. I don't know if you guys have heard about the bird declines. We've lost 29% of our North American birds since 1970. Well, they say since 1970 because that's when the breeding bird survey began. And so it's a large scale, massive effort with people, volunteers, who go out and count these birds for this snapshot during the breeding season for the last 50 years. And all of those data really helped quantify that net bird loss since 1970. There were a lot of survey efforts that fed into that analysis, but that was the big one. None of that would have been possible without those surveys. Same for the Christmas bird count. It's a different type of survey. It's a census where you have like a 15-mile diameter circle during the winter. So you go out in the cold weather. It's always on like the coldest day of the year, of course. And you count all the birds seen or heard in a count circle. So that measures the amount of birds in the non-breeding season. So you have these two metrics that are long-term. None of them are perfect, right? But they're long-term looks at the bird population. So MODIS kind of drills down a little bit closer into where more population-based, where like breeding populations are going to overwinter, where individuals, the different tracks that they're trying to take, so we can do a little bit more focused conservation through that full annual cycle. I don't know that anything has been paired up with breeding bird survey data in MODIS, but because those larger scale ones are kind of looking at the large scale over time. But I know that they are looking right now into ways to integrate all these different types of surveys, both tracking as well as the bird survey. Yeah. Yeah.
I assume that you have stations pretty close to where you're capturing birds.
Mm-hmm.
And that station sees those birds frequently before they leave.
Yeah.
What fraction of the 25 or so that you mark are captured at the other end of their travels?
So that's the hard part with MODIS, is that you don't know exactly where they're going. It still is a rough measure of where the birds are going. However, most of these passerines are very site faithful, which means they come back to the exact same place to breed every single year. And so if you have a bird, which is not the case with golden wing warblers, those small ones, because their tags only last 3 or 4 months. So you can only get one migratory movement at a time. So you either have to decide whether you want spring or fall. And we went for spring. But thrushes can hold that tag for over a year. And so from both sides on that large project, we don't want any tag deployed outside of the range of a MODIS station. We want all tags deployed within range of a station, which is also kind of different because some projects have and some projects haven't. But you want that first detection, right? You want that survival data before the bird even migrates too. So that's a big part of this project is we want all tags deployed within the range of an active station to get survival metrics pre-migration. But it's hard to say. Normally with these tracking efforts, we say, I don't know what the term I guess would be, maybe return rate or a rate of detection after release. And I think it varies so much with MODIS, especially with the network growing so quickly. But with a lot of geolocators, that's about 20–30% is you it depends on the behavior of the bird as well. I looked at geolocator and data off of whippoorwills, and they went to the exact same spots in the Ozarks and caught 50% of the birds they ever deployed tags on. And that's huge. That's a really high percentage of recap. But on some of these smaller ones, 15–20% recapture of the birds is a big deal. But also you're only capturing the luckiest or the healthiest birds, right, that return to that breeding site. And so there's a lot of different factors. It's hard to give like one percentage because it just varies so much by project and effort and things like that. Yes.
Hi, Sarah, this is great. So I was really curious that the paths were different in the spring versus the fall. And I wondered, did that reflect their food sources along their ways? And secondly, are you able to track changes in migratory paths that might reflect land use changes, like a pipeline going in?
Yeah. So the food needs, it's hard to say, right? We can't determine that from MODIS. It's hard to know like the motivations of some of these birds clearly of why they're picking which routes and why. But clearly the different routes are serving some purpose. But also we're just getting a look at 2 of those migrations, right? We don't have a tag that lasts years and years to know if they're taking the exact same route every year or not. You would assume it's generally similar, but that's an assumption, right? And so it's hard to say. Surely seasonal differences make a big weigh in on those decisions that bird is making, kind of like every spring and fall when we have like cold snaps or droughts. And last year, I don't know if you guys are birders or feed birds, but last year we had 3 weeks of tons of rose-breasted grosbeaks and Baltimore Orioles at feeders all across Missouri. Like all the birders are going crazy because there were a ton of Orioles at their houses for like 3 weeks. Our house, we had like 8 or 9 grosbeaks for 3 weeks. That never happens. But they were all staging here for a reason because the northern states were still iced up and really cold. And I think they can sense weather and pressure systems and things like that. And they know, some don't. Some individuals I'm sure go up and they can't find anything to eat and they learn that lesson, I guess. But I think birds, they can sense those weather patterns and pressure systems and things like that. And so I think a lot of different things. We can't tell from MODIS why. The second question, what was your second question?
What has to do with migratory paths related to land use?
Okay, great. So there has been, it depends on the species, but yes, there has been some really, there's 1 or 2 studies on whippoorwills where they're trying to look, you mentioned dark sky efforts, and they're looking at light pollution and where the routes the birds are taking based on different layers they have of light pollution. So they map up those maps, they match up those maps of the routes birds are taking, and they're clearly avoiding areas with lots of light pollution. And so that's a really cool study that was out of, I forget where it's out of, it was partners in Canada. I could look up that paper and share it with you if you're interested, but that was really neat. That was the first thing that kind of popped in my mind. But yeah, most of these studies we look at, whether it's nest survival, or my course like nest searching and monitoring over the years, a lot of those studies, as well as surveys, we use birds as an indicator of habitat health and whether how land management is affecting that nest success or their survey numbers, their densities. And so anytime we look at those, at least in my experience with studies like that, we are looking at metrics like that, like land use or land cover in a certain radius around the nest, or percent forest in a certain radius around each point that we counted birds. And you can find trends when you try and match up, you know, through analyses. You can, not always, but you know, if you're looking at different land cover metrics or percent forest or things like that, we try to pair up to try and kind of boil down why we think these birds are reacting the way they are. But in my mind, that's why I love ornithology. It's like it's a great mystery, right? You know, we can kind of grasp at straws of why these birds are motivated to do the things they're doing. And I think the large trends we can get a sense of, but man, they might be making decisions based on things we can't even see, right? Or measure, of course. So it's there will never be an end to the things you can study, I think, but that's a really good question. Good comment.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, have you gotten far enough along in the work yet? And would there be reports that would indicate like stopover sites that have been identified that need to be conserved?
Yeah. Not through my tagging. And there are so many MODIS papers, it's really hard to keep up. There are a lot of MODIS papers and there's a lot of MODIS research. There was a really cool project again with whippoorwills. A lot of people have tagged whippoorwills because they're declining, they're an area insectivore, they're, you know, there's a lot of interest around them. Everybody grew up hearing whippoorwill and now no one hears them anymore, right? And when the public and folks who grew up in rural areas start noticing, you know, that's probably a bad trend. That bird is declining where the public actually notices. But they tagged whippoorwills with these data logging tags across 5 states in the Midwest. And they found a number of the birds within like a 30-mile radius of each other in like the same few days during migration. And so just showing that they're all generally, the birds they tagged anyway, following this corridor of forest through Missouri and the northwest corner of Louisiana and eastern Texas. And so that's really important because we need to reach out to those state agencies and folks that manage and protect the public land in those areas and say, hey, this huge chunk of the Midwestern breeding whippoorwills are going right through your states and your corridors. Like, we must protect this, right? So it can feed in. If you have a project that's big enough, I think that's a big deal with MODIS is sample size. We want a lot of birds tagged so that we can try to increase, you know, our chances of finding these trends of corridors that these birds are taking. But with the passerines, it's tough because it's it'll only get better. The technology is increasing, but with those tags only lasting 3 or 4 months, you're really only able to get one migratory movement, which is better than nothing. And we learn something new and novel, it seems, every single study. But it's all just growing and part of this larger narrative that we're all kind of like piecing together.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems like there would be such valuable information that as it becomes available, because like I was thinking of this site that I visited in California, which is like for monarch butterflies. It's right in the middle of a subdivision, but they realized that this is one of their wintering spots, so they've been able to, you know, keep this little niche for them.
Yes.
But you know, you have to know that before you can, you know,
Right.
set it aside.
Something that becomes clearer as these projects keep getting bigger. That's why we're excited about the blue thrush project. And nobody's really used MODIS to look at. Some folks have used, you know, other types of tags to look across this species' entire range, which is awesome. And that's the scale we want to be working on with lots of partners across the whole range, right? To try and make that sample as large as possible to see what patterns we can see in that work.
Right. Who else? David?
Just one note, there's a device that can be ordered by the public. It's a listening device called Haiku Box. And it listens continuously and matches what it hears with, but anyway, it can tell you with some level of certainty what is in your yard. And you can make that also publicly available. And I'm sure researchers are thinking about using these listening devices as well. Anyway, it's called Haiku Box, and there are 3 publicly accessible and viewable Haiku boxes in Boone County, this region right now.
Cool.
Used to be just one, mine. Now there's 3.
Now there's gonna be another.
Haiku,
Haiku the poem.
yeah.
Also, the people who make the Modus receivers that we place in the state, also, they're called cellular tracking technologies, and I forget the name of the product, but they have the same type of thing. It listens, but it also detects Modus tags. But it's clearly a very small range because it's in your backyard. But yeah, that's really cool technology that people are coming up with.
Yeah, question about the Modus data. So you showed filtering it by the different stations and also possible to filter it by species
Yeah,
and individual. And I also wondered if any of that like body condition data that ended up in with the Modus data, or if that just stays with the projects that.
yeah, it stays with the project just because they don't want people to, like I said, take on those. Yeah, scoop their pods, take their data and analyze it. Yeah, so really the tag information and the individual on those, and the information on those individual birds is kept with the tag owner. And whoever purchases the tag, it's the Modus, the tag manufacturer digitizes the tag to a certain project. And so then only you can see those data on the website. But anybody can just see what the species is and stuff like that. But there's certain information that's hidden if you're, that not everybody can get. So no, the body condition data isn't tied to it. Yes, you can look by project, you can look by species, you can look by a group of species. They have a new dashboard on the Modus site. The Modus site is motus.org, if you want to look that up. But there's an Explore tab and you can just click around, but they have a new dashboard that is a lot prettier, like those tracks you saw for the woodruff, different color coordinated by date. They're testing that and trying to get out all the bugs with it. But yeah, you can filter through there by species and look at a lot of different pictures. Cool. Yeah. Audubon also has come out with a big migration mapping tool that incorporates all the Modus data, and you can click that by species and look at all the tracks, not just of Modus, but by individuals tracking data they've done for research projects, and they allowed Audubon to use it. So you can choose the species and just look at all the tracks from all these different projects, and you can click on it and see what project.
It's really fascinating. Thanks for coming. It's been interesting. I'm really curious about the tagging. I mean, the Modus is fascinating too, but getting to hold the little bird in your hand, tell me more about that, because it looks like when you see these delicate creatures, how can you grab it without breaking its wing or harming it?
Lots of training, that's really funny. Did you say that Becky Peak signed into these meetings?
I think that was her.
Okay, well, if it is Becky Peak, hi Becky. So Becky trained me, that's actually Becky, at this Becky Peak on the call, trained me in bird banding. And she's an amazing, incredible teacher, just so thorough and made sure that we were using the safest possible. You know, we had practiced over and over and over. You weren't allowed to go out and band birds on your own unless you pass the test, right? So how much does it think about? I will answer your question in a second, Becky. So yeah, so you go through lots of training to learn how to safely take a bird, not just out of the mist net that you catch it in, right? Because it can get really tangled, and so you try to get to the bird, don't leave them in the net for too long and get tangled. But it is kind of an art. I mean, you have to be trained a lot. There are some folks out there doing bird banding who maybe haven't had that much training, and I think that that's really dangerous because you can really easily hurt these birds. You can like even just spraying a leg or pulling something, or that if you're not holding the bird, if you're leaning on the net and it slips off your arm, that can wrench the bird while you're trying to handle it, and you holding it in one place can cause that, so I mean accidents happen, but you want to be really careful and have really good training. So yeah, it just takes a lot of practice to try and be able to maneuver them and not let them get away. That's another heartbreaker. Is that they get away when you're not done, or tag falls off and you're not able to put it on and stuff like that. So yeah, lots of practice. Oh, Becky. Yes, Becky asked,
how much is station?
cost? This is a great question. So it varies a lot. So if you put, a station, I keep saying station, it's the receiver, which is a mini computer in a weatherproof case. It's very small. It's like 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet. Small. And you have your antennas up at the top, right? So you need a mast or something to attach the antennas to. You can put them on a bamboo pole like folks do in Colombia at the top of the mountain. You put them on anything, just as long as you have a clear line of sight and you're pointing your antennas. So when I say station, I mean the antennas the coax cable coming down from the antenna that hook onto your receiver, and that's it. You order 2 radios that you hook onto your receiver, which are the radios attached to the antennas, and they detect the signal on the frequency. But so if you're placing a station on existing infrastructure, you already have a tower, you already have a mast, you already have a high point on your roof or something like that. It can cost like $3,000, like $3,500. It can be pretty cheap, and relatively for research, that is pretty cheap. I'd say the high end, it's probably 10 to 12,000 if you have to do a pop-up mast out in the middle of nowhere, if you have to buy solar and deep cell batteries and a container for the batteries and all that stuff. So it ranges from about really cheap if you have the existing infrastructure to about 10 grand maybe. But if you source some of those materials in Central America or Mexico or South America, it can be a lot cheaper because materials are a lot cheaper down there.
I think Christine had a question.
About the little tags. Do they have planned in obsolescence so that they will fall off?
They don't. So that all depends on what type of harness you're using. So you can, when you're building the harness for these tags, you can build in like a weak point in the harness that you know over time will, you know, make the tag fall off. Some tags, I mean, some tags are really hefty and they're probably not going to fall off for a while, but with UV and weather and all those things, most of the materials that folks are using for the harnesses to put tags on will break down. It's either plastic or fiber, right? Like it's usually stretchy jewelry thread, beading thread. And so all that stuff breaks eventually, but yeah, I mean, it varies and it's not an incredibly well-studied part of the research, but they have done studies on effects on mortality, and they wouldn't, the bird banding lab wouldn't allow people to continue to put on auxiliary markers if it were really impacting birds' mortality. But that's part of it. Anytime we handle a bird even or put anything on it, we're accepting the responsibility of potentially impacting its mortality. I mean, we all just have to be honest about that. Yeah. It's part of it, yeah.
Anybody have any additional questions?
But hold on, I will say that, you know, we want the tag to fall off and we want the bird to go, you know, back to its life without the tag. I will say that with these Costa Rican birds that we tagged, well, the golden winged warblers that we tagged, I said that we were tagging some of them on, you know, a coffee farm. And this following year, we went back to the same coffee farm to tag some birds there because there's an active motor station there. And we re-sighted 2 of the birds that we captured last year in the exact same spot on the coffee farm. They were back again. And one had dropped its tag, one didn't have its tag from the previous year, and one still did. And so we were able to recapture the bird and take the tag off. So it's hit or miss. Some fall off and some probably stay on for a little bit longer. Yes.
How did you know the bird that lost its tag was the same bird?
Oh, because it has those color bands.
Oh.
And so we did just one color band on the opposite leg that we did the silver federal band just locally. So each site, we didn't put more than like one blue one out, one black one out. We keep track whether it's on the left or right leg. And so, yeah, and then when you recapture the bird, you double check the code on the federal band to make sure it's the same individual. Yeah.
So I easily remember bats.
Yeah.
You tag bats. How do you safely do it?
I am not a bat biologist at least. I would say it's the exact same thing. You got to train. You use this nets, the same as birds. You put up nets that easily see through, so the bird or bat can't see it. You place it in a location where the bird or bat is known to fly through, and you're working under the camouflage of the net, right? Because you can't see it very well unless the wind's blowing. And netting birds in windy conditions is not great because they can see the net, right? But same thing, just takes a lot of training and rabies vaccinations and things like that. Exactly, yeah. But most bat biologists have undergone those, you know, just in case they get bit. But yeah, we're not a bat biologist, and we cannot speak to tagging bats. But there are folks that are Ecological Services office here in Columbia that do a lot of bat research and
Oh my God.
have a lot. Yeah. So, but it's a really, I think it's a really understudied part of Motus that I think is a kind of a gold mine with all the research on bats right now. Because I I think it could be a really useful way to track bats, especially between hibernacula and breeding locations. If you strategically put up motor stations, you can at least learn where they're going back and forth. Especially with some of the wind farms that are going in, and we want to learn as much as we can about where bats are moving around those and how that's impacting them and whether it is or isn't. So, yeah. Serve a lot of those purposes.
Is your data going into, there's a Nature Conservancy site called Right Site. I'm wondering if most data makes its way into the.
I don't think so. So that's a big undertaking to get MODIS data into anywhere because there's so much. And so I think unless it's a massive effort like that Audubon map, I think that's the first time that all the MODIS data has been put into a larger kind of dashboard graphic like that with the Audubon data or with that migration dashboard. So I don't think so at this point that it's being used for that.
As this would probably have to go back further than motives, but has there been much research correlating bird populations and flight patterns with agricultural pesticide use?
There have not. That's a really hard link to make, especially with all of the threats that these birds face throughout the full year, especially for migratory birds. There have been studies on neonicotinoids in particular, which are a very prominent form of pesticide that has grown exponentially, to say the least, since the 90s across the whole breadbasket of the US. It's just, a lot of seeds are just ballpark treated before they're sold, right? They're just on the seed and then they're in every part of the plant, and like 80% or more of it is leached into groundwater, so it's not even remaining in the plant. And some of them we're not even sure of the half-lives. They're very long of it remaining in the soil and then waterways. So it's a tough link to make to bird populations, but when you look at the most steeply declining group killed of birds that are declining are grassland birds, and I think that that's due to habitat loss and yeah, potentially when the food source is taking such a hit and impact like that of widespread pesticide use, it may be one of the causes for sure. It's just a tough link to make.
Is anyone, like, when you're going to all the trouble of catching these birds and they've already gone through the stress of being captured, is anyone like taking a little nip of blood to test?
Yeah. So that's another whole area of training when you handle birds is bleeding birds, because you have to tap into like the brachial vein in the wing. And if you're not trained well and like making the blood stop, right, you need like a certain amount in the vial for it to be able to test it. So it can't just be like a little tiny prick of blood. It has to be, so that's a whole other area of being trained. But yes, I think a lot of people are doing that, and they have done a lot of great studies out of, oh my gosh, I'm gonna forget the name of the university. I forgot her name, but she fed white-throated sparrows treated neonic seeds, neonicotinoid treated seeds, in the amount that the bird would come across it in nature. And she found negative effects on their navigation, like in a lab, in a controlled setting. It was impaired both its ability to navigate. It's these neonicotinoids are affecting the nervous system of insects, so it attacks parts of the brain of those birds through the food chain, or just direct eating seeds. So yes, there's been lots of research, but I can't speak to the vast effects of neonics on many different animals, but those are just a few that I'm aware of. But yeah, I think there's a lot of people working to look at the effects of those things. On one of these whippoorwill projects I was talking about in the Midwest, where they trap these birds, they're taking fecal samples to use metabarcoding to learn like what types of insects they're eating, because folks really don't know much about that. And they're also taking a soil sample, like a soil core, at the location where the bird is being trapped and where they're doing insect trapping, to see if they can relate things like that. I mean, pesticides in the soil linked to the insect communities that they're trapping in each site, how that varies across the Midwest. So yes, there are a lot of people that are trying very hard to make that link, but it's just very difficult with birds and then migratory birds. the ball wax. It's tough out there to be a bird. There's a lot of different threats.
And now we're in a drought.
Yeah, yeah. Hard to parse out what's causing it, you know, make that find that. That one cause.
Well, I think, Sarah, you've seen by the interest with all these questions.
Question.
But this was a valuable presentation and we really appreciate you coming and this evening. So,
Yeah, thank you.
thank you. And that will close our meeting, but I do want to say the library doesn't take us out just yet. So if you want to stay and socialize for another, 15 or 20 minutes, you're welcome to.
Take some strawberries out. I have too much. I'm gonna try to do.
I'm gonna close this.
Nothing. I gotta stop the recording first.
Yeah.
It'll probably just stop automatically, but.
Thanks for coming.